that this afternoon, after lunch, I think there are some of us that are going to go out and build property. I think there's going to be a lot of rain, but I don't know, but we'll see. So if you're interested in that, please let us know afterwards. We're trying to take a few people out there and have a lot of devotional in the evening, and maybe have some extracurricular activities before that. As I started last week, looking at the idea that we are kind of emerging from a fog, but looks like we're kind of entering into a cloud of smoke, maybe. I don't know. My heart and my mind has really been gravitating toward looking to Jesus. And last week I talked about what Jesus himself talked about in John 3 about the new birth, and about how the Son of Man would be raised up, would be lifted up. And as people turned to the serpent in the wilderness, that people would turn to him. That the Father gave the Son because he loved the world. Not to condemn the world, but that the world might be saved through him. And as we look to him, it is important that at this time in particular, as I'm thinking about all that we're going through, it is especially important that we do what Paul encourages us to do in Colossians 3:1 and following, where he talks about not focusing on the things on the earth, but looking up, looking to the things that are above, where Christ is sitting at the right hand of God. The idea that Jesus is reigning. And so, as we think about this idea, and I always picture it in my mind the way that Jesus spoke of it. It echoes what we find in Isaiah chapter 2, when Isaiah prophesied that the law would go out from Zion, and that all nations would flow to it. That when Jesus was lifted up, that all people would turn, they would turn from the plague of the serpents. They would turn to him and be healed. And as we think about that, as I picture that in my mind, it is important that when we fix our gaze, so to speak, on him, that we continue to be fixated and ever moving closer to him. And so when we think about Jesus, and this is maybe one of the more important parts, when we think of him as the fixed point of reference, the only thing in our lives that is totally dependable and faithful and immovable, that we must begin to move towards him. Now, if you're a Christian, that's what you've already been doing. Maybe you're someone that's thinking about being a Christian, or you're a new Christian, or something like that. That the whole idea of turning to him is then having what we just think of as the Christian life, which is an ever-moving process forward towards Jesus until the full and final embrace. And that's the proper way we need to think about it. And so as Jesus is our fixed point of reference, we have to keep our eyes on him and be moving towards him. But the reason that I'm thinking about him, and that I want to look at the passage I want to look at, a passage that I've looked at many times, a passage that we quote with the kids, is because within it you find really the mind and the heart of Jesus. Paul says that we have been given the mind of Christ. He says that he has the mind of Christ. We're supposed to speak to one another the words of Christ, overflowing with it richly. And so I want to look at a passage in particular that shows us what it means to really embrace who he is in his heart and in his mind. And so the Christian life is really a journey of doing that, of following in his steps. And so if you think of the Christian life as the narrow path, our pathway is a pathway that really is an ever-increasing embrace of the divine nature that Paul talks about in 2 Peter 1:4. In 1 Peter 2:21, Peter says, "For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving an example so that you might follow in his steps." And so as Jesus is the only perfect man who's ever lived, Jesus lived a full life in submission to the Spirit of God. Over and over again, he said, I didn't come to do what I wanted to do. I didn't come to say what I wanted to say. The things that I'm doing, the things that I'm saying, are the Father's will. He was always following the Spirit of God. And so his footsteps are that thing in particular, following the will of the Spirit. If you go up a few verses to verse 11, 1 Peter 2:11, we find where Jesus, having fought this fight continuously, was victorious over the spiritual battle. And see, I'm reminded of a few passages that I want to go to. I might want to look at after this a study of 2 Peter 1. I might want to go to Ephesians chapter 6 when we look at our spiritual warfare. When you look at 1 Peter 2:11, Peter says, Beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles, understanding that this world is not our home, that we have an expectation of what's to come. He says, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh, which wage war against the soul. Jesus was the only one who actually won that battle in its entirety. This battle is spoken of in Galatians chapter 5. This struggle between the flesh and the spirit. You find this also in Romans chapter 8. Galatians 5, starting in verse 16, you probably should be able to quote it. But I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the desires of the flesh are against the Spirit. The desires of the Spirit are against the flesh. For these are opposed to each other, to keep you from doing the things you want to do. And what we can know fully is that Jesus fully won this fight that we struggle with every day, of the flesh pulling us towards things that we really wish that we wouldn't do. And of course, what follows is a list of things that happens as an outcome of giving into that. But then what follows is what I think describes the mind, the heart, the footsteps of Christ. Verse 22, 23. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, or long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness or meekness, and self-control. When we think about the fruit of the Spirit, you can wake up every morning and you can just say those out loud, and you can say, in what ways will my mind and my life embody these things? Maybe as you put your head on the pillow at night, you can say, in what ways have I embodied these today that I can improve on tomorrow? Because this list, as simplistic as it may seem, shows us how closely we are walking in the footsteps of Christ. It really does. Now, there have been many lessons done. I've done many lessons. I've done many studies. But as my mind and my heart went back to this, I wanted to look at it fresh. I got to just start it over from scratch. And as I began to look and to dig and to be thinking of it in terms of not just a cold analysis of what these terms mean, but in the sense of having a mind in which we understand the importance of turning to our Savior and then working to embrace His heart and His mind. What does that look like? You see, because when you look at all of these in this list, they embody His life, and they embody His motives. They embody all of the things that are spelled out in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And so as we look through them, we can see the way that we can embody Him and His heart, the way that we can walk in His footsteps, the way that we can every day more and more embrace Him. The fruit of the Spirit begins with love. Jesus' brief moment on this planet gave us a full glimpse of the love of God. Jesus' compassion, His ministry, culminating in His sacrifice. These things are what define love for us. He is the definition of it. He showed us, as one of my favorites, William Barclay put it, the way he describes this term, He showed us an unconquerable benevolence. There is nothing we could do or can do to prevent him from laying down his own life like he said he would do in John chapter 10 as the Good Shepherd. But God shows his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Romans 5:8. His compassion and his sacrifice that are the embodiment of his love are in fact the very specific avenue by which we can step into and access and embrace the love of God. The embodiment that defines love is in fact our access to love. And so when we turn to Jesus, when we turn to him, we experience a full immersion in the love of God. Romans 5:1-2 talks about accessing the grace. Jesus, as our high priest, sacrificing himself, and the veil of the temple being torn in two, becomes our access. And through Jesus, as we are fully immersed in the love, this is an important concept, to be fully immersed in the love of God, it then overflows from us. You see, the embracing of the love of God through Christ has an immediate effect on us, because if we're honest with ourselves and we are truly embracing it, it's too much for us to handle. There's too much love for us to really appreciate. It will engulf us and it will swallow us up until we are overflowing with it. That's what the psalmist is talking about in Psalm 23. My cup overflows. The idea of your cup overflowing is something that happens when you understand that you've been fully immersed in the love of God. And so when we're fully immersed in this and we're overflowing with this, we become a reflection of the very basic essence of that divine nature that we're supposed to partake of. 2 Peter 1:4. When this happens, we begin to walk like Jesus and talk like him and love like him. When we're immersed in this and we embrace it and we overflow with it, we begin to bear the fruit of the Spirit, which is love and then joy. Because we are in the love of God, we can be taken anywhere, at any time, in any circumstance, and just be dropped right into the middle of it, and always be joyful. That's what it means to be fully immersed, to be overflowing with it. There isn't any place, any time, any circumstance, anything that can rob you of that joy. You see, this is why it's so important for us to think of ourselves, to think of our lives, and to ask, in what way am I tapping into the joy of God? How have I not been joyful? This is how. To immerse yourself in the love of God. Wherever we find ourselves, we always will reside in the love of Christ. That's a guarantee that we have. There aren't any circumstances that can remove that. Romans 8:31 talks about that. Nothing can steal the love of Christ from. Nothing can remove us from his grasp. That's impossible. And interestingly, and I'm no Greek scholar. Some would say that I know enough Greek to be dangerous. The root word for joy, and just so you know, the name Kara, which I guess is close to my name, but the name Kara, that's the word for joy. Kara. The root word for joy is the same as grace. Charis. Now, I don't want to make any bold claims about it. But as I meditate on that, and I think about the connections between these things, could it be that grace and joy are two ends of the same experience? Could it be that grace and joy are two ends of the same experience? That experiencing the grace of God, by being fully immersed in the love of God, bears the fruit of joy. What a beautiful idea. We bear that fruit. We're immersed in His love. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace. This word peace is very closely related, or very close to the word reconcile. And that makes sense. That makes sense that really one is the product of the other. One is the finished state of the process of one. Reconcile means coming to a place of peace. Peace is the product of reconciliation between God and man. Peace is the product of reconciliation between any two people or groups or whoever, where there is a rift in between them. We're seeking the image of Christ. We're seeking to walk in His steps. Then we're seeking a life that is defined by reconciliation. That was the ministry that Jesus had. That's the ministry that He has given us. Paul talks about that in 2 Corinthians 5:18. That we have been given the ministry of reconciliation. That we're always working towards peace. That we're not necessarily always at that place. But our ministry of reconciliation is working towards peace. Which really kind of begs the question. Do we take reconciliation seriously? Do we take it as seriously as God takes it? God takes it so seriously that He sent His Son to die so that we could be reconciled to Him. How seriously do we take it? Do we see a blood-stained cross and understand the seriousness of it? To understand what the goal peace is, and that a ministry and a purposed life that's defined by reconciliation is a beautiful life. You can't have peace without reconciliation. And we will never bear the fruit of peace if broken relationships do not break our heart the way it breaks God's heart. We have to have broken hearts first. Then we will begin to take it seriously. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering. That's the way I learned it when I was 5. Your translation might just say patience. And they're both good. Long-suffering or patience means endurance or forbearance. It's the ability to stay the course of love, joy, peace. It's the ability to endure through those when outside forces are trying to make you stop. You ever feel that way? That you're really pushing to embody these things. Maybe go to like you're seeking to push for grace. You're working on reconciliation. What happens? The outside elements, they push in on you. This word is the idea of enduring through that. It's not just a matter of, you know what? My doctor's appointment was at 8:30 and it's 9:30 and I'm not, it's not that necessarily that kind of patience. It may include that, but it's even more than that. It is about enduring in such a way that you won't stop doing what you won't stop moving in the direction that you're going. It is the ability not to act when provoked, or really not to react. It's the ability not to be moved when something tries to move you. One commentator, Robert Johnson, said that it's bearing injury without taking vengeance. It is not being fazed by what people do to you. You stay steadfast in doing what you were doing. God embodies this with us every day that we live an imperfect life. We spit in the face of the sacrifice of Jesus And God stands unfazed, loving us and seeking reconciliation with us. He is our model for this. It's the willingness to suffer long through difficulty to do what's right. We're determined to do what's right, and there isn't anything that's going to stop us from doing that. That's what this is. This is exactly the example that Peter's referring to in 1 Peter 2:21. An example of staying the course through suffering. That's what I'm talking about. Jesus suffered, setting us an example that we should walk in his steps. Jesus was long-suffering. This defines the Christian life as something potentially so difficult that it requires an ability or a determination to be immovable. And of course, we can do that. We're empowered to do that. That's the whole point of 1 Corinthians 15, verse 58. Be steadfast, immovable. Because why? Because Jesus was raised from the dead. We have the power to do that. To be steadfast, to endure, to be immovable in the fruit of the Spirit, which is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness. Now, a lot of these, if you study these at all, you'll find a lot of these just begin to blend together, right? Where does one begin and the other end? I really can't tell you a lot of these. That's okay. But I'm going to do my best, because as I looked at this, especially the next two, I've seen these now in a way that helps me, and I hope it helps you. Kindness, let's follow the process. Kindness follows patience in this passage. Love, joy, peace, long-suffering, patience, and then what? Kindness. Kindness follows the word patience in 1 Corinthians 13:4 in the description of love, and in 2 Corinthians 6:6. That kindness is a natural outflow of patience. Perhaps kindness is the response, you might say, in the actions that we take, or maybe inactions, or maybe not reacting. Kindness perhaps is the response to an injury that someone inflicts on us that we have successfully endured with patience. Let me say that again. Perhaps this is what kindness is. That when someone has done you wrong and you respond to it patiently, that what you're showing them is kindness. They can say that you're patient, but then kindness is when you treat them in a way that's different than what they expected you to do. In fact, different than what the situation warrants. Kindness is the chosen action that is unwarranted under particular circumstances. Kindness is a choice not to react, because we're seeking to follow the divine example. But Paul talks about kindness in Ephesians 2 and verse 7. That what is it that God did when he was patient with us? Did he treat us in the way that we deserved? I want you to think about this. If you treat someone in a way that harms them or hurts them or something like that, and they don't react in kind, and in fact they are the opposite of that, how would you describe that? How would you describe that person? How would you describe that action? You would say, that person is a kind person. They're not easily provoked. They're patient. And so the way that they treat me is with kindness. Kindness is, in fact, kind because it is not a proportional reaction to an injury that someone inflicts on us. When we think of kindness, we think of Christ, who didn't react. He'd already made up his mind. He'd already made the choice, as we can. When I think about all the interactions with Jesus and his enemies, and his brilliance, and his way of diffusing things, with his way of defeating their arguments, in many ways you could say that it was a reaction of kindness, because it wasn't a reaction. It was what we could think of as a transcendent, non-proportional, chosen response. And that's exactly what it is when we're kind. It is a transcendent, chosen, beforehand response. I've already chosen to be patient with this person, which means I'm not going to treat them in a way that they're pushing me away from acting in love and in peace and reconciliation. You think about just somebody that you don't know, a stranger that walks up to you. Maybe they haven't done anything bad to you, but you don't know them. They're not your best friend. They're not your cousin. And they're in need and you help them out. What are you? Well, you're kind. Well, why are you kind? Because you did something for them that isn't warranted or deserved by what they've done. Because you've already chosen, I'm going to treat them in a way that they don't deserve. You could see, and as I say this, you're probably thinking, well, isn't that grace? Sure, why not? See, all of these things go together. You might say that kindness is a manifestation of grace. That's why Paul says that God was kind to us. Or even you think about maybe you're pulling out of the parking lot today, and as for some reason during the pandemic, I think they changed the speed limit to 170,000 miles an hour on this street. I don't know what's going on. I think there are only rocket cars allowed. I've even told the guys, like, y'all watch both ways, because cars are coming about 4 times faster than normal. But what if someone, hope that they don't kill you, what if they run into you? What if it's a fender bender? Maybe you've run into somebody before. I've been run into a few times. What is something that immediately can happen? Oh, well, maybe someone pulls out in front of you, this whole thing of road rage, right? Where they didn't even do anything to you. But what if someone hits you? How do you react? Well, the circumstance warrants what? In their mind, what does it warrant? Anger? Outrage? But when we subvert what they have earned, that's when we're kind. Kindness really is an action that shows that you have elevated before you even met them. You have elevated their value. I don't care who I meet. In my mind, in my heart, their value is already elevated, which means I'm going to treat them in a way they don't deserve. That's how you choose to respond in kindness, rather to react in, go back up a few verses, the works of the flesh, what the flesh tells you to. And so we elevate their value. We elevate beyond, this is important, we elevate their value beyond what transactional value they offer my life. What can this person offer me? We often think of people in that way. We think of them as a commodity or as an item. We don't think of them as a person, which means they're made in the image of God, which means that we elevate their value. They just become transactional. What can they add or take away from my life? When we think of people in that way, we will always give into the flesh in our interactions, and we will not be kind. We will not bear the fruit of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness. The next one is goodness, and it's very close. It's very, very close to kindness. But this word could also mean generosity. Generosity. Now, I want want you to think about the implications of that. Perhaps goodness as it follows. You think about it. You're patient with someone, and so you're kind. But then, how is goodness different than that? Perhaps goodness, and this is the way that it helped me in my study. Perhaps goodness is the measure of kindness that you show someone. And we think about it in terms of the example of, well, just ask yourself the question. To what level of generosity has God shown me kindness? That's what will give you the definition of goodness. It is what? We're immersed in the love of Christ. We're overflowing with it. There's more than we can possibly ever appreciate. And so goodness becomes a measure of an enduring kindness. It's the difference between kindly giving someone in need $1, a prayer, a pat on the back. That's kind. Don't get me wrong, that's kind. But it's the difference between that and taking the time and saying, what are your needs? You don't have any food for your family? Let's get in my car. We're gonna go down to the grocery store. What groceries do you need? I'm sorry I'm not rich. I can only afford great value brand. I'm sorry. But you need diapers also? Is your car broke down? You know what? I'll give you a ride. And that's kind, right? But what if you say, you know what? I'll spend $100 to have your car fixed. I'm okay with taking some time to take you somewhere. But it's this increasing measure of kindness that we can think of as goodness. It's accompanying someone to the doctor instead of just praying for them. It's giving somebody more time than you really have to offer. When you think of somebody who is kind, oh yeah, you know what? They didn't treat me like everybody else treats everybody else. They were kind. But what does it mean? What is it in your mind when you think of someone of whom it is said, that is a good man? What does that mean? It means that they're not only kind, but their generosity of their kindness increases and overflows. Perhaps goodness is an enduring kindness that overflows into a person's life because of what? Because you have access and immersed yourself in the love of Christ that overflows from you, and you have some to spare. If kindness is refusing to act in kind to someone hurting you, then goodness is the sustained and elevated outpouring of that kindness in a way that reflects the measure to which God has shown that to us. The word good, to be good, is to be like God. It is to be godly. Even Jesus said there's no one good but God. It is this idea of approaching the way that God treats us, the measure to which he shows us kindness through Christ. That is when we are beginning to embrace the goodness of God and bearing that fruit. Fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness. Faithfulness could also mean loyalty or fidelity. Go back to the Latin with fidelis. But there's an interesting translation of it in a passage that I go to a lot. It's a fascinating chapter, Acts 17, and verse 31. Paul, Marzio, Athens, he says, because he has appointed a day in which he will judge the world in righteousness by the man whom he has ordained. He has given assurance of this to all by raising him
from the dead. The term there, assurance, is this term, faithfulness. Faithfulness is the assurance that you will keep your word, that your word actually means something, and that you uphold your covenant responsibilities. Whether it's in marriage, whether it's the covenant that you should have with your kids, whether it's your covenant with Christ. Faithfulness is the assurance that you are making good on these things. Faithfulness means mirroring God's faithfulness and extending it to others and back to God himself. You see, all of this is a following of this pattern of letting it penetrate us, reflect out from us, so that we become Christ. He takes over. Galatians 2:20. It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. That's what's happening. When we embrace the faithfulness of God, we too become faithful. But faithful also means trustworthiness. Just as God is our fixed point of reference, He's not moving, He is faithful, He's unchanging. What do you think about this? What happens when we embody faithfulness? We must become the fixed point of reference in other people's lives. We can be this for others when we're dependable, when we're reliable, when we're unshaken, when we're steadfast, when we're immovable in things like truth, in things like walking the narrow path, in things like walking in the light. When we become that fixed point of reference in the life of others, our faith, that means our faithfulness is beginning to be like the faithfulness of God. That's when we're bearing that fruit. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness. Meekness, that's the way I learned it when I was a kid, or gentleness. They're both good, but I lean towards meekness. Meekness is the willingness not to exercise your power or flex your rights or have your way. That's not what the Christian life is about. Jesus said, if anybody is going to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross. It isn't about self-will. You have to give up your self-will. And so it's about others. It isn't about what I'm free to do. You think about the liberty that God has given us to just do whatever we want to do. The Christian life is about saying, I'm not really concerned with what I want to do anymore. I'm really just concerned with what God wants me to do. And so it is this cognizance of what your ability is and choosing to deny that ability. Choosing not to exercise that power. And I think of meekness as the idea of, a big, strong guy with a little bitty kitten in his hand, and he needs to be careful. He's strong enough that he can squeeze the life out of it. And so what does he do? He restrains what he has the power and the freedom to do. First, meekness is how a person appropriately responds to God. That can be the only way that someone approaches God. In the suppression of self, the suppression of self-will, the suppression of what I have the freedom to do. This reining in of our own power before God. This is why true conversion is so important to actually bearing the fruit of the Spirit. The reining in of our own power as we submit to God, it translates to being a person who is restrained with others so that we don't cause them harm. Meekness is withholding that word that you know will cut through someone deeply. Meekness is being willing to give up freedom and property and time to help someone in need. Meekness is the willingness to suppress what you can do to do what you must do, the righteous thing, because you have first acted in meekness toward God. It's the state of mind of not needing to exalt yourself, not needing to exalt your self-will, which leads us
to the last one. Fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, meekness, self-control. And we've done it enough times that you can say the end of it, right? Against us there is no law. Self-control means temperance. It means having a mastery over self, a reining in and a discipline of self, bringing self into submission. See, it flows out of meekness. Without meekness, there is no self-control. Self-control is the ability to tell the flesh what to do rather than letting the flesh tell you what it's going to do. That's the whole struggle when you go back to verse 16. The war between the flesh and the spirit. But really, it's not a matter of me telling the flesh what to do. It's a matter of letting God, the Spirit, the Son, tell the flesh what to do. To let the Spirit dictate to the flesh what it's going to do. It is about taking the power away from the flesh and giving that power to God. Some of you know that I've done a little bit of fasting. Not always consistently, not always successfully, but I've done quite a bit actually, so that it's kind of a normal thing to just step into. One of the amazing things that I didn't really understand was, from doing this, was learning how much power I have to just tell myself no. We do not realize how much power we have to just say no. Oh, you're hungry? No. Do you know that you can do that? That when your body wants you to do something, I know Cary does like a bit of fasting. Especially Alex. You can fatten him up, right? It's always a fight. It's always a fight there between me and Cary and Alex's diet. That's okay. But we fail to see that it is up to us. It isn't up to the flesh to decide what we're going to do. We can just say no. And the more that you say no, the more that you learn how much power you really have over the flesh. Self-control is ultimately about a power shift from one master to another, from the flesh to the spirit. One definition of this word, actually, if you look it up, one definition of the word self-control is the word continence. The opposite of that would be incontinence. So the idea of a Christian who does not have self-control is a baby who needs a diaper. You think about that. Someone who does not know how to have self-control is a spiritual baby. They do not know how to say no. They don't know how to control themselves. That's the one of the words there that underlies this meaning. I want you to think about when you analyze where you are in your life and in your ability to say no to things. That will tell you where you are in your level of spiritual maturity. You see, if the ultimate goal is to be like Christ, then self-control really is the ultimate fruit of the Spirit. It's the last one in the list. It has been said that if someone lacks self-control, then they can never really be a servant to anyone else. You see, unless Jesus was embodying all of the other ones, so that he could say no to the flesh, he could never be our servant. Someone who is ruled by their flesh, ruled by their passions, ruled by their desires. This is a person who is totally unacquainted with sacrifice, with being able to make sacrifices. A sacrifice of self-will is the only way to be a servant. It's the only way that Jesus was a servant. Controlling self was the only way that Jesus found himself on the floor washing people's feet. Saying no to self, controlling self was the only way that Jesus found himself hanging on a tree, having laid his life down for us. Until we master self, we will never be
able to serve and to bless the way that Jesus serves and blesses. Until we surrender self, Jesus will never be able to bless us. Because surrendering self is about making Jesus your Lord. As I talk about this, what do you have trouble saying no to? What do you need to surrender so that Jesus can bless you? As I said at the beginning, the fruit of the Spirit shows us how closely we're walking in the footsteps of Jesus. How close are you to walking in his steps? To what extent have you embraced him? Have you not even turned to him at all from the plague of sin? You can turn to him and see him as your salvation and embrace him. You can change masters and elevate him as your Lord. Confess him before men. You can say no to self in repentance. You can enter into it and be immersed in the love of God and be baptized in the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. You can follow in his steps with the eventual expectation of embracing him. Maybe you're along that path. Where are you? Maybe you just found out that you're a spiritual baby. Maybe you need help. We want to help you. Randy's going to have a song of encouragement. This is an opportunity now and at other times that you can make things right with God. You can come to the Savior who can save you so that you can embrace him, embrace his heart, embrace his mind, embrace the divine nature. If there's anything you need, come as we stand and sing the song.